cleaning and organizing. It seems simple, right? But what if I told you that some of the things we believe about keeping a tidy home are actually holding us back? I used to think, oh, this might be useful someday. Or, I need a bigger house for all my stuff. Looking back, I realize how wrong I was. These little lies we tell ourselves don't just take up space in our homes, they take up space in our minds. Curious yet? Good. Let's explore these misconceptions together. I'll reveal the myths that kept me stuck, from the idea that everything needs to be spotless to believing I had to tackle it all by myself. Trust me, it's not about working harder or longer. It's about working smarter and letting go of what's weighing you down. Ready to uncover the truth about cleaning and finally enjoy the process. Let's get started. First, we often convince ourselves that we're doing the right thing by holding on to things we might need someday. It sounds practical, even responsible, but in reality, this is one of the biggest reasons our spaces become cluttered. The truth is, no matter how useful something might be, it's worthless if it never actually gets used. That kitchen utensil you never touch or that jacket you haven't worn in years, it's just taking up space and creating stress. Instead of holding on to these things out of guilt, imagine the difference they could make for someone else if they used and appreciated them. Letting go isn't about waste. It's about making space for what truly serves you right now and letting go of what doesn't. Second, have you ever said to yourself, "This place is too small"? This is a common excuse, but the real problem is often not the size of your space, but the clutter in it. No home can feel spacious if it is filled with things you don't need or use. Instead of wishing for more space, start by rethinking what you're holding onto. Do these items actually add value to your life, or are they just taking up space? By letting go of things that no longer serve you, you can turn even the smallest home into a peaceful and functional retreat. Third, around the beginning of the year, I bought myself storage boxes, and at first I felt like I had everything under control. But no, there was too much stuff to put in the boxes, and the number of storage boxes multiplied so much that my house looked more cluttered. It was then that I realized that these organizing products won't make a difference if the real problem is that you have too much stuff in the first place. It doesn't matter how many storage boxes you have. If your stuff isn't under control, they'll only mask the problem temporarily. So I downsized and got rid of things I no longer needed. After I've cleared out the excess and assessed what's left, only then should you consider adding storage options, and even then, they should be used to enhance the space you've made more manageable. Fourth, we've all been in this situation, keeping something just because it's still good, or feels like it's too wasteful to throw away. It might be an old coat gathering dust in the back of your closet, or a broken coffee maker that you keep telling yourself you'll fix someday. The thought of throwing these items away makes you feel guilty, like you're being wasteful. But the truth is, when you keep things that no longer serve you, you're just taking up valuable space, both physically and mentally. I once kept a perfectly good blender that I didn't use much because I was juicing so much that I didn't pay much attention to it. It was still good, but it took up space on my kitchen counter and reminded me of my mess every time I looked at it. And I realized that it wasn't doing anything for me, so I sold it to someone who needed it. Fifth, a friend once shared the story of a bike that had been sitting in her garage for years. The tires were flat and the chain was rusty, but she couldn't bring herself to let it go. "I'll fix it soon," she told herself every time she saw it. Months passed, years passed, and the bike never budged an inch. One day, she finally admitted that she didn't have the tools or the time to fix it. Realizing that it was just taking up space and making her feel guilty, she decided to donate it to someone who could actually fix it and use it. The empty space in her garage became a reminder that it's okay to throw away things that no longer serve you. Her experience taught me an important lesson: holding on to broken items in the hope that someday can weigh you down more than you realize. Sometimes cleaning feels like it takes all day, right? I used to think that way, believing that I had to spend hours getting everything done. But I've found that breaking it down into smaller tasks makes it a lot easier, which is my 6th tip. For example, instead of cleaning an entire room, I'll start with a drawer. Just the other day, I cleaned out a drawer in less than 10 minutes, throwing out old receipts and random clutter. That little effort made a big difference. I've also learned to clean as I go. Like when I ran out of a moisturizer recently, instead of letting it pile up with the other empty bottles, I recycled it right away. It's nice to deal with it right there instead of letting it sit there. Another trick that works for me is keeping a mess box. Whenever I find something I don't have time to deal with, I throw it in there. Then, when I have time, I go through the box and sort through everything. Cleaning doesn't have to be overwhelming if you take it one step at a time. Trust me, those little victories add up, and before you know it, your home will feel a lot lighter. Number 7. I've seen this happen many times. Some people are reluctant to part with an item, believing it's too valuable to throw away. But here's the thing. Value is often subjective, and just because something was once considered important or expensive doesn't mean it still has a purpose in your life. For example, you're holding onto an old item, like a top-of-the-line camera from years ago that's now gathering dust in a drawer. You tell yourself it's too valuable to part with, even though it's been replaced by your smartphone for years. The truth is, its true value lies in its use, and if it's not being used, it's essentially worthless in your day-to-day life. So it's not about throwing away value, it's about transferring value to where it truly belongs. Eight. I used to hold on to a lot of things, thinking that if I let them go, I would lose the memories attached to them. I had old birthday cards, souvenirs from trips, and small trinkets that all had sentimental value. I believed that these things were essential to remembering moments. But reality set in when my house started to feel more like a storage room than a place of peace. These things started to pile up, and I couldn't move without tripping over something. And I realized that I didn't need to keep everything to hold on to those memories. Instead of holding on to tangible objects, I started taking pictures of them, creating digital albums that allowed me to store memories without cluttering my space. I could look back at those photos and feel that same joy without being constantly reminded of the clutter around me. And in the process, I cleared out a lot of unnecessary things, making space for new memories. I found that the memories themselves were much more valuable than the things I thought I needed to keep. Last year, I visited a friend, and although his house was spacious and airy, there was something off about the atmosphere as soon as I walked in. It wasn't the size of the rooms that made me feel uncomfortable, but the clutter. Despite having so much open space, the house was still filled with stuff. I asked him, "Why is everything just lying around?" He calmly replied, "There's still plenty of room to store everything. I'll take care of it bit by bit." But not long after, he called me, frustrated that the clutter was getting out of control. He finally decided to clean up and put things back in their proper places. The difference was immediately noticeable. His house was lighter, tidier, and much more pleasant to live in. This experience made me realize that having space isn't enough if the stuff that fills it doesn't add value to your life. Keeping things you don't really need or love just weighs you down. That extra space isn't just for your stuff, it's for your peace of mind. 10th, I used to believe there was a perfect way to declutter, a single right method that guarantees success. That idea took hold when I discovered a productivity channel on YouTube that laid out a detailed step-by-step guide to organizing. Determined to get it just right, I followed every instruction, created elaborate plans, and even bought recommended tools. But instead of making progress, I felt paralyzed by the pressure to do it perfectly. The clutter around me stayed the same while I kept revisiting videos and fine-tuning plans. It was only when I let go of the idea of perfection that things began to change. I stopped worrying about whether I was using the best system and simply started clearing one small area at a time. A messy corner became clean, then a drawer, and eventually my entire space felt lighter. What mattered wasn't how closely I followed a system, but that I took action, even imperfectly. Sometimes, the best way to make progress is to stop overthinking and start doing. 11th, when dealing with excessive clutter or chaotic spaces, staying productive is to break the task down into smaller, more achievable steps. For example, if you're trying to clean an entire room at once, it's easy to feel paralyzed before you even begin. Instead, focus on one small section at a time, like a drawer or a corner. I learned this approach when my living room felt impossible to clean with toys, books, and random items scattered everywhere. Instead of tackling it all, I started with just the coffee table, then moved on to the sofa and worked my way up. By the end of the day, the space felt fresh without the stress of trying to do it all at once. Not only does this make the process more manageable, it also helps you stay motivated, keeping your home tidy even during the busiest or messiest times. There are times when I look around and feel completely overwhelmed by the clutter. The piles seem endless, and the thought of sorting through it all feels overwhelming. I convince myself that there's no way I can get it under control. But then I realize something important. No matter how messy it is, a home is just a finite space. That means it's totally manageable. I remind myself that there are plenty of people who have been in similar situations, or worse, and have succeeded in creating orderly, peaceful spaces. What makes things even harder for me is watching picture-perfect cleaning videos online. They set the bar so high that I feel like giving up before I even start. Eventually, I stopped comparing myself to those stories and focused on going at my own pace. Those small wins helped me see progress, and I began to believe that I could actually take control of my space. 13th, one of the most common excuses people give for cleaning is that there simply isn't enough time. The truth is that time can often be found even on busy days. It's about shifting priorities and making room for what really matters. Instead of thinking about cleaning your entire home at once, you can spend just 10 or 15 minutes a day. It's amazing how much can be accomplished in a short amount of time, and the best part, is that you won't feel pressured to spend hours on it. You don't have to do it all at once. Every little effort counts and will ultimately result in a more organized and peaceful space. A trap that people often fall into is waiting to clean up when they're inspired. But the problem with this way of thinking is that motivation often never comes when we need it. Waiting for the perfect time means we procrastinate and let the clutter pile up over time. Inspiration rarely comes without action. The key is to get started, even when you don't feel like it. Once you get started, the feeling of accomplishment can actually boost your mood, making it easier to keep going. I used to think that having more stuff would somehow make my life better or more fulfilling. However, after a while, I began to realize that this way of thinking didn't serve me at all. In fact, it did the opposite. The more stuff I kept, the more cluttered and overwhelmed I felt. What I realized was that it's not about how much stuff you have. It's about keeping only the things that really matter. These are the things that have a purpose or bring joy to your life. When I started focusing on quality instead of quantity, I found that less really is more. Sometimes, I find myself holding on to things, believing they're worth more than they actually are. This belief is actually tied to something called the endowment effect, a psychological phenomenon where we tend to overestimate the value of things we own simply because we own them. To get a clearer picture of the actual value of your belongings, you might want to take some time to look them up online. In fact, the true value of something isn't determined by how much we think it's worth, but by how much someone else is willing to pay for it. If you can't find a buyer, it doesn't really matter how much you think it's worth. This is where the choice becomes clear. Do you keep it or do you let it go? Maybe it's not worth as much as you thought, and it's time to sell it or pass it on to someone who will appreciate it. Letting go of these things can be a liberating experience, helping you realize that not everything we own needs to carry such weight or meaning. Number 17. It's common to feel financially guilty about parting with things you've bought, especially when we think they're still usable. We often find ourselves thinking, I spent money on this, so I should keep it. However, what many people don't realize is that the money was spent when we bought it, not when we chose to throw it away. In fact, holding on to things out of guilt can often create more waste in the form of space taken up, mental clutter, and time spent maintaining items that no longer serve us. Sometimes the better option is to release those items, recognizing that the investment has been made, and that letting go can actually release more value into our lives. It's easy to convince ourselves that we'll eventually find the perfect time to use something we've been holding on to. We often tell ourselves, when the right occasion comes, I'll finally use this thing. But in reality, that moment rarely comes. We wait for special circumstances that never seem to materialize, and before we know it, years have passed, and the item is still sitting there, unused. The truth is, if we haven't found a reason to use something, it's likely to continue gathering dust, taking up valuable space in our homes and minds. It's better to let go of these items and make room for things that actually add value to our lives. Number 19. Parting with your belongings can feel overwhelming, almost like you're being asked to let go of a part of yourself. But here's the thing. Sometimes the things you're holding onto aren't just objects. They're symbols of your fears, your comfort zones, or past versions of yourself. And while it may seem difficult to part with them, you may find that they're not actually improving your life. Instead, they're cluttering up your space, both physically and mentally. You don't have to get rid of everything right away. Just remember that staying stuck in the past isn't the only option. The more you allow yourself to let go, the more you give yourself room to grow. Number 20. Tidying up isn't just about getting rid of tangible objects. It's a much deeper process than that. At first, I thought it was just about cleaning up the space around me, throwing out old clothes, books, and gadgets that were no longer useful. But as I started to let go of these items, I quickly realized that the work was actually emotional. What I had to clear out wasn't just physical objects, it was also the emotional clutter that had built up over the years. But it doesn't stop there. While you may be focused on your physical environment and mental health, there's a huge opportunity to clean out your digital space, too. The endless notifications, emails, and files we accumulate can feel as overwhelming as a cluttered home. And don't forget your schedule. Our schedules are often filled with obligations and distractions that drain our energy, leaving little room for what really matters. So instead of limiting your decluttering to just tangible items, think about other areas of your life that you can simplify. I learned that social media can be overwhelming if you constantly compare yourself to others. Instead of letting it weigh me down, I decided to clean up my feed, delete accounts that made me feel stressed, and follow accounts that inspired positivity and growth. This small change shifted my mindset, reminding me that progress, whether in life or cleaning up my space, is personal and doesn't have to be on anyone else's timeline. You don't have to label yourself a minimalist to pursue a simpler, less cluttered lifestyle. Minimalism isn't about limiting yourself to 100 possessions or wearing a monochromatic wardrobe. It's a deeply personal approach that's different for everyone. For some people, minimalism might mean clearing out their physical environment, creating a quieter space to think and relax. For others, it might mean saying no to commitments that drain their energy or limiting digital distractions that distract them from what's important. The great thing about this approach is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You can adopt the aspects of minimalism that work for you and leave the rest behind. While minimalism can certainly reduce stress and help you focus on what matters, you don't have to go to extremes to reap these benefits. Instead of trying to achieve someone else's definition of minimalism, focus on what makes your life lighter, more intentional, and more fulfilling. Thanks for watching my video. I hope it helps you. If you like it, please like and share.